Hi, this is Greg Johnson with Blue Book Services, and I'm joined today with Mark Campbell, who is co-founder of ProduceIQ. We've been running some ProduceIQ market analysis the past few weeks. And Mark, this week's big story was the storm hitting Florida and affecting a great deal of the vegetables there. Can you expand a little bit on what the market's going to see based on this storm and how supplies will look in the next month or so?
Sure. Thanks, Greg, for having us on. We see prices continue to be elevated through Thanksgiving and Christmas. What's interesting is the storm came particularly late in the year for Florida. And if a Florida grower would prefer to see a hurricane in August than to see a tropical storm in the middle of November. And so though it didn't have the quite devastating winds that you would see with a major hurricane, it came at the point of the growing cycle that impacted harvesting the most and dropped a lot of water. So areas that had 4 to 12 inches of rain, particularly in Homestead, which is vulnerable to having high water tables, and the crops grown there are sensitive, cucurbits mostly.
What would you say a commodity or two that's been hit the hardest that the market will notice?
Yeah, so beans, squash, cucumbers have been most impacted. All crops in Homestead. In that dry veg category as a whole, the leader is pepper, which is not as impacted because pepper is grown further north in Palm Beach County and also over in Immokalee, which wasn't as ground zero per se for Homestead. But the beans were largely devastated, and so most of the supply chain will rely on Western production and some of the other sparsely growing areas.
Yeah, we mentioned we're still in the lead up to Thanksgiving, but most of the market has already done its Thanksgiving shopping. So looking forward to the Christmas and New Year's, would you say this could be a big problem as far as supply goes?
I don't know that it's there's major shortages of product. It's really just that prices will generally be elevated. So I think we're still dealing overall for 2020, which has been a wild year, of course, in that we're running about 5% lower volume right now and at elevated prices. And there's mixed dynamics. There's really been a shift in the demand from of course, a drop off from high-end restaurants, and then a pickup from the family box program, more in retail, of course, and a shift towards hardware items that have longer shelf life.
Yeah, you mentioned the hardware items, and we're talking about the hardier items such as citrus and apples, and they're kind of a little bit of a better story in the market, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. So the consumers picked up on the health benefits of citrus and apples, and also just that they're not as perishable, or they have that long shelf life in your pantry, and so some reliability. And it's great, overall for the produce industry, for the consumer to get reintroduced to those items and start figuring out how to cook again. But we see it also, carrots, and then any table stock items in those categories, so onions as well, but not necessarily the food service varieties for those hardware items.
So what is that doing as far as the pricing? The demand is higher than a typical year. What should we see for pricing for the next few months?
Yeah, we generally see the overall market continue to rise. Our index had shown it rose over 6% last week over week. We expect that will continue, which is at the very high end of the range. We started our index 15 years of data is what we're using. We went back further and decided that was most relevant. And so we believe that the overall market will trade at the highest end of that range, particularly for all the items we mentioned, and some of the other categories as well, including wet vegetables and leaf and lettuce.
All right, well, that's a pretty good market overview. our readers and viewers should note that we run these reports typically on Mondays, so check those out. And we do have one up on our site that we posted Monday that has some of that tropical storm coverage. And we have a link to ProduceIQ website in that story. So Mark, I appreciate you being on with us today, and thanks for the insight.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having us.
All right.